Hey everyone, it's crazy to think that back in the early medieval times, people were terrified of tough warriors showing up out of nowhere on big boats with dragon heads carved on the front. These were the Vikings, famous for stealing and attacking towns. They traveled all over, from deep inside Europe all the way to North America. But way before they reached there, they set their sights on the green lands of Ireland, and what happened after that totally changed Ireland's story. It all started around the year 795. Small groups of Viking warriors suddenly showed up and attacked peaceful places like Rathlin and the monastery of St. Columba on Iona. They were fast. They grabbed shiny treasures, valuable metal objects, even religious items, and then disappeared just as quickly. At first, these attacks involved only a few ships at a time. They sailed along the coast, set fire to places like St. Patrick's Island, and left before anyone could react. Ireland didn't have much defense near the coast, so the people had to watch helplessly as everything was taken away. By the early 800s, word got out in Scandinavia that Ireland had lots of riches. More Viking crews decided to head there. They had learned new sailing skills from traders in the west, which made their ships even faster and more dangerous. Before long, these weren't just surprise attacks. They became full invasions. Around the year 807, the Vikings started moving into the western bays of Ireland, going after places they could reach quickly from the water. Monasteries, once quiet and peaceful, became favorite targets because they had gold, books, and valuable art. The monks tried to stay safe. After being attacked again and again, some moved inland to protect their treasures in safer places like Kells. But even that didn't stop the raids. In 820, an old Irish book called the Annals of Ulster said that the sea was pouring out foreign invaders, and there was nowhere safe, no fort, no castle, no landing spot. For 40 years, these Viking attacks continued. The invaders didn't even have names in the records. They were like ghosts along the shores. Then came the year 837, and everything changed. Instead of small attacks, two huge Viking fleets with around 60 ships each sailed up the rivers Liffey and Boyne. Thousands of warriors came into the center of Ireland. These weren't just wild raiders anymore. They were part of big organized groups like armies. They started to fight real battles against local Irish forces. In one battle, the Irish fighters from Brega stood up to the Vikings and won. But even when the Irish did well, the Vikings would return with more attacks. As time went on, the Vikings weren't just after gold anymore. They also took people as prisoners to sell or ransom. And starting around 840, the Vikings began staying in Ireland during the winter. They built special camps called longports to keep their ships and soldiers safe until the next fighting season. One of the first of these was at Dublin. People were shocked when, in 841, the Vikings were still there in the cold months. These camps made it easier for them to raid more often and push deeper into the country. These camps eventually turned into Viking towns along the coast, places like Waterford, Wexford, Cork, Limerick, and of course Dublin. Even though the Vikings never took over huge areas like they did in England or Scotland, they still had a big impact. They married into Irish families, traded goods, and left their mark on Irish culture. Their names and styles are still seen in Irish towns and art today. Not long after the Vikings set up strong camps along Ireland's coast, Irish kings realized they had to take action. Around 845 CE, an Irish king named Neil Kai, who ruled a place called Tara, showed he could beat the Vikings when he won a battle in Donegal. Just a few years later, in 848 CE, another Irish king named Mael Secnall, I said he had defeated about 700 Viking warriors in one big fight. Since the Vikings were now building camps and staying in one place longer, they weren't as quick or hard to catch. This made it easier for Irish fighters to strike back. But something unexpected started to happen. The Vikings stopped being only enemies. Some Irish kings began hiring Viking fighters to help them in their own battles. In some cases, they even married into Viking families to form stronger bonds. By the end of the 800s, it wasn't strange to see Irish and Viking soldiers working together. They also traded goods and shared control in some areas. The Vikings, who once came just to steal and raid, were now becoming part of Irish politics. Then, in 849 CE, more Vikings arrived, this time from Denmark. They came with about 100 ships. But they didn't come to attack the Irish. Instead, they wanted to take over from the Vikings already living in Ireland. These new Vikings fought big battles against the older Viking groups. In 853 CE, they even won a long sea battle at a place called Carlingford Loch. But the older Vikings fought back hard and chased them away. While the Vikings were busy fighting each other, the Irish likely took a break and watched from a distance. By the late 800s, the Vikings realized that Ireland wasn't easy to take over, unlike some other places like England or France. So, some of them started moving to new places like Iceland and northern England. That gave Ireland a bit of peace for a while. In Dublin, what had started as a Viking camp in 841 CE, had now grown into a busy town led by strong Viking leaders named Amleb and Eamar. They built a network that connected Ireland with places like Scotland and the Isle of Man. When Eamar died in 873 CE, Viking raids slowed down. Then, in 902 CE, Irish fighters came together and kicked the Vikings out of Dublin. The Vikings left so quickly, they had to leave behind many of their ships. But they came back. In 914 CE, Viking ships returned near Waterford. They took back Waterford and later grabbed towns like Wexford, Cork, and Limerick. Dublin also came under Viking control again. This time, the Viking leaders there also ruled over places in England like York and Northumbria. Trade grew fast, and these towns became busy places for both Vikings and Irish people. The Viking king in Dublin worked closely with Irish rulers, and together they built new ways to share power and wealth. By the end of the 900s, the Viking story in Ireland was coming to an end. In 980 CE, the Viking king in Dublin, Amleb Cuaran, tried to take even more land, but was defeated by the Irish king Mael Secnall MacDomnail at the Battle of Tara. After the loss, Dublin gave up, freed Irish prisoners, and had to pay money to the Irish. From that point on, the Viking towns were ruled by Irish leaders instead of Viking ones. Then came the famous Battle of Clontarf, in 1014 CE. It was a huge battle where Vikings and Irish warriors fought on both sides. The Irish High King Brian Boru died during the fight, but the Dublin Vikings were defeated. This battle showed that Vikings weren't outsiders anymore. They had become part of Irish life. When the Normans came to Ireland in 1169 CE, the Vikings had already left a big mark on Irish culture, politics, and everyday life. What started as a scary invasion had become an important part of Irish history,